Welcome to the On-Premise IT podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic or on premise and on location or on premises. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries. In this episode, we're talking to a group of folks from Storage Field Day about the future of storage. And quite frankly, one of the things that we hear quite a lot of is that basically everything has gone to flash, everything is flash memory, and not, disks are passe. Tape, what is tape? We even talked to a company that doesn't want to admit that they're using tape. But, the truth is actually a little bit more nuanced than that. Flash hasn't really replaced disk all that much, and flash certainly hasn't replaced tape, and neither has disk. So today's premise is that basically disk and tape are never going to go away. They're just going to continue on, and flash is just going to get more important, but, never going to go away. Before we dive into that, though, let's meet who's on the panel today.
Hi, I'm Jim Czuprynski. I'm a technology advocate for zero defect computing. You can find me on Twitter at Jim the Y Guy.
I'm Richard Kenyan. I've been in the IT industry for about 25 years. I'm currently an infrastructure engineer at Kubrick in Buffalo, New York, and you can find me on Twitter at Richard Kenyan.
I'm Ray Lucchesi. I've been in the IT industry almost 50 years, much of that in storage, doing tape and disk types of storage. So it's very interesting. I'm at Ray Lucchesi on Twitter. I'm also a podcast co-host at Graybeards on Storage, and I blog at rayonstorage.com.
We've seen a lot of things over the years. We both remember before, and Jim, honestly, all of us probably remember before flash memory was really a storage media. I think it's easy to forget that this stuff is fairly recent. And before that, you had disk and tape, and there was a lot of controversy over disk displacing tape and all this. Do you think it's ever going to change, Ray? Are we going to?
Well, I think what you're finding in solutions like this, that they become, relegated is not quite the right word, but they find a niche and they stay there for a long time. The only way they can be displaced from that niche is if they stop investing in the technology. Tape is continuing to invest in technology. They're doubling capacity every, 2.5, 3.5 years. Disk is continuing to invest in their technology. They're doubling their capacity every 18 months to 36 months. As long as they continue to do that, they will continue to have a place to play. Tape, quite frankly, tape is still active and being used quite a lot, and there's lots of money being made there. Is it growing? It's probably not growing in revenue. It's growing in capacity. And a lot of the larger hyperscalers and larger data-saving entities in this world are using tape and will continue to use tape because it's economically viable and it's environmentally viable. Disk has a similar type of thing.
Yeah, I haven't seen tape in the small business enterprise for a long time. The last time I even touched a physical tape was about 2008. And we were replacing it with a hard drive-based system for backups. And it's still there, it's still relevant, but in the day-to-day small business entity world, I think it's just completely gone. It's been replaced by cloud solutions, it's been replaced by on-premises storage, it's been replaced by both of those things. In small quantities, tape doesn't make sense anymore because it's something you have to physically touch and physically maintain. Some of the earlier generations of tape software weren't the most user-friendly, and there was a lot of overhead to it. Looking into the new tape vendors now and how the software works might be a significant improvement, but I just haven't seen it in the small business area.
So it's interesting. We were chatting back and forth via Slack during Storage Field Day 24, and one of the interesting things that came up was, anybody remember zip drives, right? Which, again, I think it was 100 megabyte capacity.
Then went to
right?
250.
Yeah, and then it went, right. I don't think I've touched a tape cartridge since probably 2005, 2006. So
I can fix this for you guys. It's not really that hard. I can get you tape cartridges.
Okay.
I've got friends in the tape business.
Yeah.
But that's a good point. I think that the tape is not something you encounter very frequently, and it hasn't been for what it's worth. It hasn't been for a long time. When I was an undergrad, most of us actually did carry around our projects and our work on a tape, reel of tape. As a way to move, back and forth to the computer center or something like that. But even then, that was considered kind of strange. And now, obviously, people don't do that. When I was in IT, certainly we did encounter a lot of DLT and later LTO and 8mm at first. And then, we encountered a lot of tape, but not so much. I think that the tape infrastructure that is there is hidden from people for the most part because it's really, kind of buried deep in the infrastructure layer. And as Ray says, a lot of cloud providers are still using a lot of tape. They just don't talk about it.
Yeah, and another aspect behind it, it's still around. The only thing that disturbs me about tape personally is you don't know if it's good or bad until you actually put it in the cassette reader or mount the tape or whatever, and then you find out that, as it happened to me one time, the beginning tape mark wasn't there. And now again, that's back last millennium, but there's no predictive analytics, if you will, on a cassette tape, really, to see if it's okay.
And my experience was similar. It wasn't hardware-based from the tape losing its marking or the indexing not working. It was always the software, that the backup software that I was using at the time was still one of the worst pieces of software I've ever used. It was absolutely awful. I couldn't manage the library. I couldn't do backups easily. I couldn't do restores easily. The process of backing it up to the tape and the tape working never was a problem. The tape always worked. It was always ready to go, but the software interface in front of it just was not there.
Listen to me. Tape has certain characteristics. Yes, you can't tell if it's bad until it's actually mounted and read. And yes, there can be software associated with these things in the front end of these things that cause problems with it. But the characteristics are, once a tape is written, you can put it on a shelf and keep it there for 25 years. It costs no power. It costs no cooling. It costs no, other than space. It's pretty much impregnable. Yes, it can have problems, and yes, you probably want to read it every 5 years or so, and maybe even rewrite it every 10 years or so, but to a large extent, it's the most efficient, economically efficient, environmentally efficient storage known to mankind.
And not only that, but in terms of manufacturing as well. We talked to Fujifilm about that a while back at Storage Field Day, and they were showing the incredible environmental benefits. I mean, you think a tape cartridge is made of plastic, it's got some, but it's actually really low impact to make that thing as opposed to a hard disk drive or flash memory.
Yeah. So, disk drives aren't going away. Disk drives have their own characteristics, and they have to be powered on, and they have to actually, you have to seek and do things, and there's time and effort to support it and provide support for it and provide software around it. But it's got its capability. I mean, if you look today, if you look at the market today, there's probably 75% of the storage bits being manufactured today is disk. Not flash, and not tape anymore either. So it's still a significant portion of the market being generated today. And who's using it? The hyperscalers. And why are they using it? It's cheap.
Yeah,
and reliable.
Thanks for that, Ray. Yeah. I actually wanted to take that next step. So we talked about tape. Let's talk about disk. Most of us, just like tapes, we don't encounter tape drives in our daily life. Most of us don't encounter computers with disk drives in them anymore either. And disk drives were everywhere. I mean, there was a disk drive in the dashboard of my car. There was a disk drive in my iPod. There was a disk drive, in my computer, of course. And all those are gone. So are disk drives irrelevant?
No, not at all. Disk drives are well-known technology, and they have not only increased in speed and capacity over the years. Every piece of software written from probably 1970s to today was specifically designed for tracks and sectors. And it still is, even though you put an SSD in a system, that entire software stack is still designed for that technology. It's very efficient, it's well known, and the number one rule in storage is don't lose data.
Exactly.
And if you have a hard drive that's powered off, bearing a mechanical defect, that data will be there when you turn it on. And that is due to the software stack that's behind it. So it's very, very relevant in the backup industry. It's very, very relevant in servers. You may not touch it in your workstations or laptops or devices in cars and things like that anymore, but I touch a disk at least once or twice every few months just to either swap one out, to add new capacity to something, to build it into a local server that's sitting in a closet because it's cheaper than SSD at the moment.
Yeah, I use disk to back up my laptop. I use disk to back up my desktop, and I keep them in safe deposit boxes. I keep it in a shoebox. I keep them everywhere. I mean, disk is there. It's going to continue to exist. There's these graphs. You'd have to see the graphs, but there's a trend on, it's data per square millimeter or whatever, and the trends are all the same. So SSD is this way, disk is underneath it at 10x, and then tape is underneath that at 10x. So as long as they can maintain that technological gap between those technologies will continue to exist. And when they stop, that's dead.
Yeah, and you can augment disk with SSD. So even people who are running small business
with disk.
Yeah, but you're not. But were you ever using tape in the last 20 years to actually run systems live, or was it always a backup medium?
Last 20 years.
In media and entertainment, yes.
Okay. Yep. But you can still, for my point was that you can still buy hard drive based systems and put a couple terabytes of SSD cache in front of it, and that system will be fully performant for years to come for the specifications that you bought it for. If you don't need, 1 million to 2 million IHOPs sitting in your server closet, buy a smaller system that's more cost effective. It'll be perfectly fine for what you utilize it. You'll never see the benefits of all of that SSD power if you're running all flash. Now, all flash is lovely if you can afford it. But if you're cost constrained, that's one of the first things that you change is all SSD to hard drive.
Yeah, I remember it's almost 12 years to today that I was at a storage seminar hosted by Oracle in downtown San Francisco, and someone had the audacity to say that in 10 years, the only place you'll find a disk drive is in a museum. And there were blasphemer, things like that were actually coming out. And at the time, I could see that would happen, possibly, but predictions as they are.
It's the same thing with mainframe, right? Mainframe has been around since, the early 60s, right?
Sure.
It still exists today. The reason it still exists today is it's technologically okay, and they're continuing to advance the technology every year or every 2 years. A new Z system comes out. And it's embedded into so many systems today that it would be painful to pull it out. And as long as they continue to advance the technology, it'll continue to exist. Is it growing? Is it revenue growing? Probably not. But the capacity or the MIPS that are being used there are growing.
Yeah.
So I want to make the point, too, that one of the things that happens a lot of the time is that the technology sort of finds its niche, finds its spot. And I think one reason, Richard's question here about, what used tape for primary storage, not a lot, because that wasn't its greatest niche. I mean, tape is great for streaming data. And so things like, broadcast recording and things like that worked pretty well on tape, but you had to kind of match the bit rate or else you'd be in trouble. And, it turned out that tape was much more efficient in the way that Ray was describing it as a backup and archiving medium. Discs, similarly, I think that one of the challenges with discs is that they have all sorts of, constraints on their usability, and they're not so good in terms of IOPS, random IOPS, and reads and writes, and all that. I mean, they're better than tape for sure, but they found their place, and their place really wasn't in your portable music player. It was somewhere else because Flash displaced it there.
I worked for a company one time, and then one of the managers there said that most people don't care where their data actually is stored as long as they can access it from memory very, very quickly. Right. So if it's got tape behind it and if it's properly archived or hierarchically stored so that it was in memory when you wanted it, you're fine.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're starting to see things here, interestingly, where things like persistent memory are actually starting to kind of take the place of that SSD flash cache area, if you will, or conundrum. So the other aspect is that, going back to what Ray said, right, is, well, can I get to my data fast enough? It's not that I have super, excellent speed. Really, very few applications require that level of speed. Somewhere below 5 milliseconds access time is probably okay for most applications. And
for the record, the DBA said that.
Okay, 10 milliseconds, but anyway.
Ouch. Ouch.
And there are ways that I can make that better. But the point is, I guess, fast enough, is good enough for almost, especially the applications now that, as we were talking here today and yesterday, was that a lot of it is much more towards data science, right? Or analytics, possibly even predictive or prescriptive analytics. Unless you're, trying to deflect an asteroid and you have to do, super magical calculations to do that every, 1/1,000,000th of a second, it's probably okay.
Well, I think that's the thing, right? It's not that it's fast enough or cheap enough or low powered enough or capacity or whatever. It has to be good enough. It has to be good in all the different aspects for whatever the application is. But you bring up another point there, and I want to kind of dive into that. So there was this industry trend to look into persistent memory. I mean, we saw the Optane kind of come and now go. There are other persistent memory technologies out there that companies are talking about still. Do you think that these are going to be another layer of another part of the hierarchy above flash memory, or is flash memory it?
They were there, right? I mean, for a long time, when 3D XPoint came out, we thought it was going to take over the industry. And it was going to be, it was going to find its niche at the top end of this thing, and flash was going to be pushed down, and everything else is going to be pushed down. The fact that it hasn't turned out yet is a problem, but it's because it was very costly to manufacture, and they never reached the volumes that they wanted to. If they reached the volumes they wanted to, they'd probably be fine, but it's just not there. But can it get there someday? Yeah. Is MRAM maybe the next solution rather than phase change memory? Maybe. Whatever it is, there's something on the horizon there that's going to be the next technology.
Well,
Flash is going to be relegated to its own little niche.
And that's exactly what I was trying to get at. Is right now we live in the flash era, absolutely, and it's easy to think that discs and tape are irrelevant, but they're absolutely not. They have their own niche. Is there another era? Flash? Yeah.
Well, I was thinking the same thing, is if the new persistent memory comes out and does what it promises in a consumer-friendly manner, we're not talking data sciences or schools or people who have dedicated teams programming applications for it. It's, I have a software stack that I need to stand up in my small business or even large business, and I go to Dell or HP or EMC or IBM or NetApp or Pure or and name a storage vendor and say, I want to buy this array because it does this many IOPS. Which is it? Is it going to be persistent memory, or is it going to be SSD, or is it going to be hybrid, or is it going to be spinning? If it can be consumer friendly in a 80% of the industry, that's when your niches are going to come out, because that's how SSD came out. It went in all the storage vendors. It went in all of the hard drive, all of the laptops, and all of the desktops, and all of the phones and the iPods. It became easy to consume. And if you don't make it easy to consume, nobody's going to consume it.
Realize that NAND's been around since, probably the 1990s, maybe even the 1980s or something like that. They've been working on NAND technology for a long time. Before it became an SSD, SSDs really came out in, 2005, 2006, something like that?
They came out in thumb drives first, right?
Yeah.
And then there were compact flash cards before that.
But, it takes a while for a technology to gain traction. It has to find a niche in some sort of a market where it can start to build up volumes. And to a large extent, 3D XPoint came in as a niche in persistent memory, and it just didn't gain the traction it needed to.
I remember Rambus RAM.
Yeah. Well, ReRAM exists, MRAM exists, PCM exists. All these technologies exist. They're on a track to get there. They're just not there yet.
Yeah, so I think the original NAND from EPROMs and EEPROMs from the
1980s, right?
It's 1970s. I think that nobody would have guessed that would have taken over the world in 20 years later. But what I want to ask actually to you guys is, how are you so sure that flash won't become cheap enough, high enough capacity, durable enough, et cetera? Why are you so sure that flash won't edge out disk drives? Because we're talking today at Storage Field Day, we mentioned that there were 60 terabyte SSDs on the horizon. Well, there aren't 60 terabyte hard drives on the horizon at all, not for a long time. And frankly, hard drive capacity has been sort of stalled. So why are you so sure that flash doesn't mean an end to disk drives?
Yeah. The question is, can they maintain the gap between price per gigabyte for flash. They didn't talk about the 60 terabyte flash drive costs today. And they didn't talk about how many QLC NAND chips would have to go into such a thing. But yeah, you can do it. Yeah, it can be done. And to some extent, the fact that they're now just not only scaling two-dimensional, which is QLC, TLC, and PLC, they're also scaling three-dimensional, gives them a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, we're over 200 layers now.
Yeah, well, I understand that. And this guy's talked 192 layers for QLC, which is pretty impressive.
Right.
It's cost though, a 16 terabyte drive and a 32 terabyte drive in arrays are 14 grand a pop from OEM vendors. Yeah. That's expensive when you say you can get a $1,000 drive that's half as much capacity, it's spinning, but you can put one SSD in front of it that's 800 gigs, and the total cost of solution for the entire thing is less than the one SSD that you want to fill an entire bank of stuff with.
Yeah. Right.
Right now, the cost is just a massive swing, and it's affordable, much more so than it was 10 years ago. But when you compare the cost of hard drives to the cost of SSDs at massive scales, the maximums, the graph is just huge.
Well, but are they? That's the thing. So you look at the cost of SSD or hard drives. The hard drives really haven't come down that much in price or gone up that much in capacity in the last few years. And I don't know if that's
They're still increasing capacity. They're still coming down in price. It's not like it's going away. I mean, and it's still 75% of the storage market every year is being generated. It's on disk, or 67%, whatever the number is. But it's not gone away. I mean, there are niches for this technology, and it will continue to exist in that niche as long as they can continue to invest and continue to advance the technology. The moment they decide to not, it's death.
And maybe that will happen, because, I mean, that's the other thing, is that we're down to just a few makers of hard disk drives. We're down to maybe, I think, one maker of heads. Is there still going to be advancement in that technology?
And another interesting aspect of that, too, that we actually talked about, of the 4 presentations we talked about in 2 of them, right, is the E of the ESG component, right? Yes, disks are still being manufactured, but they are heavier. They probably require a lot more energy per drive, if you will, to cool, to power, and everything else. And if, again, we were asking for some stats on that, right? But if SSDs suddenly become dramatically less of a carbon footprint, if you will, and again, how you would calculate that, that's another story. I think you might start to see people go, let's start thinking about going more in that direction. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's simply not going to happen overnight.
Well, no, and I don't think anybody thinks it is. But yeah,
before you keep going, you keep mentioning hard drives have an increase in capacity. I have seen hard drives double in capacity from 8 to 10 to 16 to 20, and now I see 22 terabyte drives I can buy off of Amazon, slap in my Synology, have 8 of them, and I've got a significant server in my house now. It used to be I had 10 gig drives, and then I had 100 gig drives, and I still couldn't fill up that. And even 10, 15 years ago, I still can't fill up a 120 gig drive. I'm not doing movies and video creation and content creation. There's big consumer drives out there right now.
What we find with disk is there are technological epochs, and it's associated with the head technology, the media technology, and they go in these leaps, and for a couple of generations, they're not changing the technology as much as fiddling around the edges. But every once in a while, there's this technological leap that occurs that takes them in a whole different track from a density perspective. And yeah, it's slowing down. The density doubling is slowing down, but it's not slowed down completely.
Well, now I'm going to poke at you about tape then, because you look at tape technology.
Here's the thing about tape. Tape uses disk technology that's 10 years old. So the heads that are in a tape drive are 10-year-old disk. So as disk continues to increase in capacity, tape will be there.
So you think we're going to have heat-assisted tape?
What's to stop a laser on a tape drive from to melting or warming up the bit pattern that's on the? No, yeah, sure, why not? If that's what it takes, yes.
But I think that's I'm just trying to push at this, because you look at it. So there's really only one vendor of tape drives now. There's really, I mean, is there more than one vendor of tape media?
I think there is more than one vendor of tape media, but there's only 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's only 3 hard drive manufacturers.
Exactly, and
that could be argued down to 2.
And you look at these technologies, and it's clear that
So how many NAND vendors do we have out there? 5, 6 today?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
and
so
one of
it's
them's
not-
owned by a hard drive manufacturer.
Yeah.
So yeah, what I'm trying to do is kind of just push at the question, and I think right now we don't see a time when hard drive is really substantially pushed to the side. But I think that hard drives have to keep up. Tape drives have to keep up, and if they don't, and there's no saying that they will, then they will be pushed aside.
Looks what happened to optical, right?
And that's what I was going to bring up next.
Optical CDs and DVDs, they were going so well, and it was great. All of a sudden, the technology stopped being invested in because it was being driven by consumers, and consumers moved on.
Yep. Absolutely. And optical is, I think, a great example because that line that you mentioned, the good enough thing, it all stopped. And suddenly the capacity wasn't there, the cost wasn't there, everything didn't make sense anymore, and optical as a storage medium is dead. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't say, now there's obviously, there's some companies that are working on some exciting new technologies there. Maybe optical as a storage medium will come back with new technology, but right now,
you look at the ecosystem behind disk drives and media and heads and stuff like that, the ecosystem behind NAND fabrics and stuff like that, there's billions and billions of dollars going into this technology. Optical doesn't have that anymore. It had that when it was a consumer product, but it's lost it.
Yeah, optical was fast, easy to use, reliable. You could rarely damage it except for scratches, and even those were few and far between if you're really honest with yourself. And then one day I bought a computer that didn't have an optical drive in it and went, well, guess got to use something else. It's just gone. Like I never touched it again after I didn't have one in my home personal computer. Even game consoles now, I know we talk about Blu-ray was the next big optical thing, and now 4K and videos that come on your PlayStation or your Xboxes, that's the only place I still see those, and those are still geared toward digital downloads now. They now have hard drives and SSDs in them because the optical medium wasn't able to keep up with what the game industry was doing.
With no optical now.
Yep, and I honestly think the next iteration of both those systems are not going to be optical anymore. They'll be straight digital.
So let's sum it up then. The question the premise of this discussion is that flash is not going to displace disks and it's not going to displace tape. Are you committed to that?
I pretty much agree, yeah.
Yeah, for the foreseeable future, I'm very committed to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can we agree that we stop at tape? I don't want to go back to Hollerith cards. I just want to say that. I don't want to know what a card file is or have to describe it to somebody.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident that doesn't have a big future in computing, but we'll see. Maybe it will.
Maybe it is time to retire.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation. Before we go, please let us know again where we can find you. What's your blog or your articles or podcasts or where?
So you can find me at Jim the Y Guy on Twitter, also jimthewhyguy.com for my blog post, and I'm also the co-host of BeyondTechSkills.com podcast. We talk about everything about tech except tech.
Richard Kenyan, I'm also on Twitter at Richard Kenyan and LinkedIn at Richard Kenyan, and I also do a lovely podcast with 2 other co-hosts, and it's IT Reality US.
I am at Ray Lucchesi on Twitter. I am rayonstorage.com as a blogger, graybeardsonstorage.com as a podcaster, and silvertonconsulting.com is my company.
As for me, I'm Stephen Foskett. You can find me at sfoskett on the social medias. You can find me at gestaltit.com. I am the host of the On-Premise IT podcast along with Tom Hollingsworth. You'll also find me hosting the Utilizing Tech podcast, where we're doing a season focused on CXL technology after 3 seasons focused on AI and ML. And of course, you'll find me on the weekly Gestalt IT News Rundown. This episode of On-Premise IT is brought to you by gestaltit.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. You can find us in your favorite podcast applications. Please do subscribe there. You'll also find us on YouTube at YouTube/GestaltIT video. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.